So what was it like recording, touring,
It was
performing?
it was fun.
What if I told you that one of the world's biggest rock stars accidentally became part of a centuries-old mystery? Jon Bon Jovi thought he was just taking a quiet family vacation on a luxury yacht, but what the crew found hidden in the walls would change everything and leave investigators completely stunned. This isn't your typical celebrity scandal. No drugs, no wild parties, no arrests. Instead, it's something far more mysterious and valuable than anyone could have imagined. Something that had been hiding in plain sight for who knows how long. Stay with me, because what they discovered will amaze you. A quiet morning on the Croatian coast, the crystal-clear waters of the Adriatic Sea, and then, stepping off a sleek black boat, one of music's biggest legends, Jon Bon Jovi. He wasn't there for a concert, no screaming fans, no flashing cameras, just Jon, his wife Dorothea, and their youngest son Romeo, looking for a peaceful escape from the chaos of fame. They boarded a massive 180-foot luxury yacht called Rarity, and trust me, this boat lived up to its name. 5 huge decks, multiple lounges, rooms for 12 guests, and a price tag of $280,000 per week. This was floating luxury at its finest. Jon looked relaxed, just a regular dad in a black t-shirt and shorts. The locals noticed him, sure, but he kept things low-key. No big security team, no special treatment. Just a family wanting some peace and quiet on the beautiful Adriatic Sea. For the first few days, everything was perfect. The yacht was like a floating paradise. Jon would wake up early, grab his coffee, and just stand on the deck watching the sunrise. Dorothea would join him, and they'd sit together in comfortable silence, taking in the incredible views. Their son Romeo was having the time of his life with all the water toys, paddleboards, underwater scooters, you name it. The family kept things simple. Good food, beautiful scenery, and quality time together. No phones, constantly buzzing with business calls, no packed schedules. They cruised past gorgeous islands, watched dolphins play in the waves, and enjoyed quiet dinners under the stars. For a rock star who's used to performing in front of thousands of people, this was exactly what he needed. The crew noticed how different Jon was from other celebrity guests. He learned their names, said good morning to everyone, and treated them with respect. Just a down-to-earth guy enjoying time with his family. But on the third day, something changed. It started small. A weird metallic sound at night, something that didn't quite fit. You know how sometimes you hear a noise in your house and think, that's not normal? That's what happened on the yacht. One of the engineers was doing routine checks when he noticed something odd. A maintenance panel that was slightly open when it should have been closed. Behind it, cables looked normal, but there was something else. Something that definitely didn't belong. There was a wooden panel that looked completely out of place. It was older, rougher than everything else on the yacht, like someone had added it after the boat was built. The crew started whispering among themselves. This wasn't supposed to be there. They checked the yacht's records. No mention of any modifications in that area. Nothing. Meanwhile, Jon and his family had no idea anything was happening. They were still enjoying their vacation, completely unaware that something mysterious was hiding just a few feet below them. The crew knew they had to investigate further. What happened next will give you chills. When the crew carefully removed that wooden panel, they found a hidden space about the size of a small suitcase. And inside that space was something incredible. They pulled out a wooden object about 2 feet tall, wrapped in old yellowed cloth that crumbled when they touched it. As they unwrapped it, they couldn't believe their eyes. It was a hand-carved religious statue, not some modern decoration. This thing was old, like centuries old. The surface was dark with age, decorated with worn gold leaf, and covered in script that none of them could read. This wasn't just any old statue, this was a piece of history. The crew was stunned. How did a centuries-old religious artifact end up hidden in the walls of a modern luxury yacht? And more importantly, was it legal? The yacht's captain knew this was serious. He contacted experts on land without telling Jon and his family what was happening. Can you imagine? One of the world's biggest rock stars is relaxing on deck while historians are examining a mysterious ancient artifact just below him. A maritime expert from Split, Croatia, examined photos of the statue. His assessment was mind-blowing. This was authentic 18th century religious art, probably from between 1690 and 1730. The carving style, the materials, the wear patterns, everything checked out. But here's where it gets even more interesting. The expert found old church records that mentioned a coastal parish that used to exist, but was destroyed by storms in the 1800s. That same parish once owned similar statues used to bless fishermen before they went out to sea. This statue might have been carried by sailors centuries ago as protection, and now it was on Jon Bon Jovi's yacht. This discovery created a huge problem. Croatian law is very strict about cultural artifacts. You can't just find a centuries-old religious statue and take it with you. The authorities needed to be involved. But there was another issue. Nobody knew how it got there. Was it smuggled? Was it hidden by previous yacht owners? Had it been there for years without anyone knowing? The crew was in a difficult position. They wanted to protect Jon and his family from any legal trouble, but they also couldn't ignore what they'd found. An expert came aboard secretly while the family was having dinner on shore. He spent hours examining the statue with special equipment and lights. His conclusion? This was the real deal. Priceless, authentic, and it belonged in a museum. But the most shocking discovery was yet to come. Hidden in the base of the statue was a secret compartment sealed with old beeswax. The expert didn't open it, but he explained that these compartments usually contained religious relics. Pieces of cloth, fragments of wood, sometimes even prayers written on parchment. Whatever was inside had been untouched for centuries. This transformed the statue from just an old carving into something irreplaceable, a piece of living history that had somehow ended up on a rock star's vacation yacht. When Jon was finally told about the discovery, his reaction was perfect. He wasn't angry or upset. He listened carefully, asked questions, and then said something that showed his true character. If it belongs here, it stays here. The statue was transferred to a maritime museum in Dubrovnik, where it could be properly preserved and studied. Jon signed the yacht's guest book with a simple message: a beautiful journey, one I won't forget. Thank you, Croatia. He even promised to return with his band, not just to perform, but to visit the museum where the artifact now rests. What started as a simple family vacation turned into one of the most unusual archaeological discoveries in recent memory. Jon Bon Jovi accidentally became part of a story that stretches back centuries, connecting modern-day rock and roll to ancient maritime traditions. The mystery of how that statue got on the yacht may never be solved, but thanks to the crew's honesty and Jon's integrity, a priceless piece of Croatian heritage was saved and preserved for future generations. Sometimes the most incredible discoveries happen when you least expect them. Even rock stars can stumble upon history. What do you think happened? How did that statue end up on the yacht? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories like this one.
Different things like that, like things you would never think of. Crazy stuff. We said yes a lot to mostly everything and everywhere.
They were more than bandmates. They were brothers in boots.
You think you knew the real story behind one of rock's most shocking breakups? Think again. After 11 years of carefully guarded silence, Richie Sambora has finally pulled back the curtain on what really happened between him and Jon Bon Jovi. And let me tell you, it's absolutely explosive. This isn't just another celebrity feud, folks. This is the complete destruction of a 30-year brotherhood that gave us some of the greatest rock anthems of all time. And what Sambora just revealed, it's going to change everything you thought you knew about Bon Jovi. For 3 decades, Richie Sambora and Jon Bon Jovi were more than bandmates. They were musical soulmates. Together, they crafted timeless masterpieces like Livin' on a Prayer, You Give Love a Bad Name, and Wanted Dead or Alive. Their chemistry was legendary, their success was astronomical, and their bond seemed unbreakable. But in April 2013, something shocking happened. Right in the middle of Bon Jovi's Because We Can tour, Sambora vanished. Gone. Just like that. No warning, no explanation, he simply walked away from everything they'd built together. For 11 years, fans have been left wondering what really happened. Why would someone abandon a multi-million-dollar empire at its peak? And most importantly, what was Jon Bon Jovi's role in this devastating split? Well, people, the wait is over. In a recent explosive interview on Billy Corgan's The Magnificent Others podcast, Richie Sambora didn't just break his silence, he detonated it like a nuclear bomb. And what he revealed? It's absolutely devastating for Jon Bon Jovi's carefully crafted image. Sambora revealed that late in his tenure with Bon Jovi, he had a conversation that literally shook him to his core. But this wasn't just any conversation. This was the moment that destroyed a 30-year partnership forever. Here's what happened. After Sambora finished touring in support of his 2012 solo album, he reached out to Jon, ready to dive back into their legendary songwriting partnership. They'd done this dance for decades. It was their formula for success. But Jon Bon Jovi dropped a bombshell that would change everything. Jon Bon Jovi said all of a sudden, "Nah, you don't gotta worry about songwriting. Session guitarist John Shanks and I wrote like 30 songs. Can you imagine? 30 years of partnership, hundreds of millions of records sold, and Jon Bon Jovi just casually tells his creative soulmate that his services are no longer needed. Sambora admitted, "It shook me a little bit, but here's the kicker. He didn't give up." Despite being blindsided, Sambora kept an open mind. He said, "All right, what do you got?" And then came the final insult. When Sambora listened to those 30 songs that Jon and Shanks had written together, his worst fears were confirmed. And it didn't sound like Bon Jovi. It didn't sound like the band, Sambora revealed. Can you imagine that gut-wrenching moment? 30 years of your musical DNA, your creative fingerprints on every major hit, and suddenly you're listening to something that sounds like a complete stranger wearing your band's name. But wait, it gets even worse. Sambora's recent revelations paint a picture of a frontman who was systematically pushing out his most important collaborator. "I felt like Jon was changing his focus and he often wanted to be a solo artist," Sambora explained. This wasn't some sudden revelation. This was a slow, calculated betrayal that had been building for years. Picture this. You're Richie Sambora, the man whose guitar riffs defined Livin' on a Prayer, whose harmonies elevated Wanted Dead or Alive to legendary status, whose creative partnership built a billion-dollar empire. And your supposed best friend, your musical soulmate, is secretly planning to erase you from the equation. This wasn't just about creative differences. This was about ego. This was about control. This was about Jon Bon Jovi wanting to be the sole star of his own show, even if it meant destroying the very partnership that made him famous in the first place. The evidence was everywhere. Jon's increasing desire for solo projects, his willingness to work with outside songwriters, his gradual distancing from the collaborative process that had made Bon Jovi legendary. Sambora could see the writing on the wall, and it spelled out his exile in brutal clarity. And the most heartbreaking part, Sambora now says that if he could go back in time, he might have left a couple of albums before, because I think Jon was moving into a place where he wanted to not really be a band. Think about that for a moment. The man who helped create some of rock's most beloved songs is saying he should have abandoned ship even earlier because Jon Bon Jovi was already mentally checking out of the partnership. This revelation cuts deep. It means that while fans were celebrating albums they thought represented the band's unity, Jon was already plotting his solo future. While Sambora was pouring his heart into their collaborative work, Jon was treating it like a stepping stone to something bigger, something that didn't include his longtime partner. Now, you might think that after all these years, there would be some remorse, some attempt at reconciliation. You'd be wrong. When asked about their relationship recently, Jon Bon Jovi was ice cold. "We're not in contact because he's not in the organization any longer." Let that sink in. The organization, not the band, not our friendship, the organization. Could he sound any more corporate, any more heartless? This is how you describe a business merger, not a 3-decade brotherhood that created the soundtrack to millions of lives. Jon even made it clear that he had nothing to do with Sambora's involvement in their recent documentary. They interviewed Richie in London. "I wasn't there," he explained coldly. "I had nothing to do with it." This is how you treat a brother, someone who helped you build a rock empire from nothing. Now, to be fair, Sambora has always maintained that his departure was primarily about family. His daughter Ava needed him at a crucial time in her life, and he made the difficult choice to prioritize fatherhood over fame. But here's what's truly revealing. It wasn't a popular decision by any means, obviously, but there was really almost no choice about it, Sambora explained. Almost no choice. Those words carry weight. They suggest that the situation with Jon had become so unbearable, so toxic, that walking away from everything was the only viable option. And here's where it gets really interesting. Despite everything, despite the betrayal and the cold shoulder, Sambora has kept the door open for a potential reunion. In May 2024, he even said that if Jon's voice recovers from his recent surgery, if he gets his voice back, "I'll go play." But Jon Bon Jovi, he's shown zero interest in healing this rift, zero interest in acknowledging his role in the destruction of their partnership. Meanwhile, Sambora continues to battle personal challenges. Just recently, he underwent emergency surgery after breaking his hand in 2 places during a touch football game. But did Jon reach out? Did he show any concern for his former creative partner? The silence speaks volumes. So here's what we're left with. A rock legend who helped create the soundtrack of our lives, systematically pushed out by an ego-driven frontman who valued solo control over collaborative genius. Jon Bon Jovi may have kept the name, but he lost the soul of the band when Richie Sambora walked away. And these recent revelations make it crystal clear. This wasn't just a business decision or creative differences. This was a betrayal, a 30-year partnership destroyed by one man's desire to be the only name on the marquee. Richie Sambora didn't just break his silence, he exposed the truth about what really happens when fame, ego, and power corrupt even the strongest of bonds. The question now isn't whether Bon Jovi can survive without Richie Sambora. They've proven they can continue. The real question is whether Jon Bon Jovi can live with himself knowing he destroyed one of rock's greatest partnerships for the sake of his ego. What do you think? Was Jon Bon Jovi justified in pushing Sambora aside, or did he destroy something beautiful for selfish reasons? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more explosive celebrity revelations that will shock you to your core. Because trust me, this story is far from over, and what comes next might be even more devastating than what we've heard so far.
Mo Howard or Larry Fine, because I knew they were still alive, and the operator said, well, we have several M. Howards, but only one Larry Fine.
For decades, the world laughed at the Three Stooges, unaware that behind the slapstick, Curly Howard was silently cracking. In his final days, Larry Fine disclosed the heartbreaking truth. Curly wasn't just overworked, he was crying out for help as his mind slipped away, and no one listened until it was too late. This is the story Columbia Pictures wanted buried. Curly Howard was the wild-hearted whirlwind of the trio, while Larry Fine served as the quiet, observant middleman caught between Mo's aggressive leadership and Curly's chaotic energy. On screen, they were the perfect comedy team. Off camera, Larry was witnessing something far more sinister, the slow destruction of his friend's mind and spirit. During the early days of the Three Stooges, before the fame and big paychecks, Larry often shared rooms with Mo and Curly. They lived close together, and nothing stayed hidden for long. Larry occupied a unique position as the observer between his two partners, and this vantage point allowed him to notice things that others missed. When the cameras rolled, Curly lit up the room with his infectious energy. But when the spotlight went dark, so did Curly. Larry began noticing a disturbing pattern. Curly would go completely quiet backstage, staring at walls for minutes at a time, completely unmoving. Sometimes he wouldn't even respond when someone called his name. This wasn't simple fatigue. It was as if something inside him had turned off entirely. Unlike Mo, who was vocal with statements and updates, Larry remained quiet and observant, but he was deeply affected by what he witnessed. He began keeping notes, writing down observations in his travel journals, and jotting thoughts on the backs of scripts. Some of those pages survived, and they tell a painful story of a man slipping away while still right in front of us. Larry didn't have terms like dementia or neurological illness to describe what he was seeing. These conditions weren't widely understood in the 1940s, but he knew something was fundamentally wrong. Curly started having emotional outbursts between takes. One minute he'd be laughing with the crew, the next he'd be tearing up and walking off set without a word. Larry was often the one who followed Curly during these episodes. He'd sit next to him while Curly held his head in his hands, mumbling that he wasn't getting it right anymore. Larry would reassure him, telling him he was doing great, but deep down, he was terrified. He told a close friend years later that the Curly fans adored on screen had already begun to disappear before the first stroke ever hit. Curly began forgetting entire routines he himself had created. His once playful outbursts now came with flashes of confusion and anger. There were days when Curly wouldn't show up to the set, and no one could find him. The situation was becoming impossible to ignore. Behind closed doors, Larry and Mo had a private conversation they rarely mentioned afterward. Mo was pacing the dressing room, almost panicked. He told Larry he didn't think Curly could keep going. They agreed their friend needed a break, but Columbia Pictures had other plans. When they asked to pause production or rest Curly for a few months, the studio's answer was brutally clear: No, if Curly couldn't perform, he'd be replaced. Just like that. Larry never got over that moment. He later said that was the day he realized the act had become a business first and a brotherhood second. They weren't a team anymore. They were products, and Curly was the main attraction. What happened on stage during Halfwit's Holiday in 1946 would confirm every fear Larry had been carrying. The collapse on set was supposed to be another routine short, but Larry said something felt wrong from the moment they arrived. Curly looked distant, barely spoke, and his eyes didn't focus properly. The crew joked that he must have had a late night, but Larry wasn't laughing. Larry pulled Moe aside and said flat out, "Curly isn't right." Moe agreed, but the show had to go on.